like to go into is just explore a little bit about what English composition actually is, and go from there. So allow me to just tell you a little bit about English composition, what it actually is, and give you a little sample here. Allow me to read a sample course description from Community College of Allegheny County, which is pretty local to where I live. It says this. It says, this is a course that introduces or continues to familiarize students with critical thinking, the principles of academic writing, and rudimentary research skills. Through the writing process, students refine topics, develop and support ideas, investigate, evaluate, and integrate appropriate sources, edit for effective style and usage, and determine appropriate approaches for a variety of contexts, audiences, and purposes. So, ultimately, in order to develop well-formed cases, it's necessary to have a good foundation with the basic mechanics of the English language. So this includes vocabulary, spelling, grammar, syntax. All those things are important in building good mechanics, good solid foundation with the English language. Certain modules of class time are typically focused on these areas, meaning the vocabulary, those foundational things, spelling, vocabulary, grammar, but with the intent of really utilizing those lessons that are learned in those areas for the primary task at hand, which usually in English composition and English 102, which is the next step after English 101, which is just, the essay writing, essay construction. So many universities train the students in the formulation of different kinds of styles of essay writing once they've really mastered those foundational concepts. So in order to really develop well-formed cases, excuse me, with these different kinds of essays in college, it's necessary to have a good foundation, as we said. And some examples of those essays would happen to be maybe cause and effect essays, compare contrast essays. You're looking at the causes of maybe a certain social problem, maybe seeing the effects that certain things cause, making arguments or relationships there, comparing and contrasting maybe two topics or two issues. There's also a topic, a nature of an essay called a dialectic, which is more of a philosophical kind of essay, where the writer kind of makes a thesis and an argument, and then presents a counter argument, and then, as a rebuttal to that, presents a counter to the counter argument, and therefore thereby supports the initial position in the paper. There are also some other genres of essays, one of which is a narrative, which really kind of employs a lot of sensory language and imagery, and is more of a plot, can almost be spoken of as a personal experience, sort of. There are also, like we alluded to earlier, persuasive essays, which come in handy in the workplace, especially if you're in the business management field. And also probably one of the more simpler essays would be sort of the expository genre of essays, which allows the writer to explain or define a subject matter to the reader. So you're just required to describe something to the reader. Not really argumentative, but it's more descriptive, which is easier. So I just want to kind of highlight some aspects of that course description that I gave you. And I noticed that I mentioned it familiarizes the student. So the class is designed to familiarize the student with critical thinking. And the critical thinking is really defined as the ability to analyze either sentence structure or grammar, the style or verbiage, or the style or legitimacy of an argument, and to make an informed evaluation as a result of having applied sound reasoning and writing skills. So that's critical thinking. Some of the other things that it's interesting that this that this course description mentions: critical thinking, the principles of academic writing, and rudimentary research skills. So the principles of academic writing. Interesting note, because there's writing and then there's academic writing. So the principles of academic writing are really what English composition is really wanting to get you geared toward, because a writing structure, according to the academic principles, is really a structure that follows a rather standardized format. There is room for uniqueness in academic writing, but there are standardized principles, standardized formats that are required, and that readers, especially if they're in academia, they're really required. Well, not required, but they sometimes look for these structures and the formats in your work. For example, the proposal reader, somebody who might be reading the proposal, might be looking for a certain kind of structure we alluded to earlier. Looking at the summary, looking at really what the body is, what they're really wanting, and then in conclusion, just summarizing things. A thesis statement, something that kind of is an overarching statement stating what your paper is going to be about. Conclusion, summary, body points, support points, things like that. Back to our description of the course of English composition. So it says, through the writing process, students refine topics. Writing process, getting back to these principles of academic writing. What is a writing process? Well, through the writing process, like we said, there's a standardized process that academic writing goes through. And just to kind of give you a little preview of that standardized writing process, these are some of the steps of the standardized academic writing process. There is pre-writing. That's the first step. Your second step is defined as sort of an outline. Then you go into revising and editing. And once you've edited and you've gone through a few iterations of editing, then there's publishing. I can go into some specifics. I'll just kind of hit on each of these very briefly. But described in the pre-writing, in this step, really the writer generates, in any kind of essay, this is the format you want to follow. You go through generating, writing, brainstorming. It's like kind of trying to get the juices flowing, gathering ideas, generating ideas to write about, and then kind of beginning to develop these ideas. That's pre-writing. In your outline, you want to kind of begin to systematize the thought process that you have, the ideas, the flow of maybe if it's your argument or your story, the descriptions, things like that. So the writer determines the overall organizational structure of the writing and creates an outline that sort of generate organization to the ideas. This step usually involves additional fleshing out of the ideas from the pre-writing step. In your revising step, in this step the writer revisits the draft and reviews the draft that was kind of written in the outline step and reshapes the content, kind of tweaks it, tries to refine it, fine-tune it. This stage involves moderate and sometimes major changes. This is probably one of the more critical stages because you're really going from kind of gluing everything together, beginning to develop something a little more polished. So this is where things could really take a turn or just kind of keep going forward. So changes could include adding or deleting paragraphs, phrases, different points, or expanding important ideas, organizing content, so forth. Editing is kind of once you get that sort of draft that's kind of has some cohesiveness to it. In the step, the writer makes some additional changes. These changes involve maybe some subtle new changes to style, how things are said, different conventions, replacing vague words with more appropriate words or precise words, fixing grammar and spelling. These are kind of really the nitty-gritty polishing of that. Once the stage is complete, and it usually goes through a few iterations here, one of which is peer editing, which is very important. You always want to get a second pair of eyes to review your papers. But once it goes through the peer editing, and maybe it goes through some major editing, and maybe even goes back to revising, getting rid of huge chunks or adding huge chunks. But you will be ready then to publish your paper, and that's when it's presentable. So that's just kind of the general outline of what is referred to as the writing process or academic writing in your English composition class. And it usually is very good to have multiple, well, not multiple necessarily if you don't have it, but have at least one other person to read your paper to help you refine your ideas. There were some other points in that course description, and we referred to, so we said writing, through the writing process, students refine topics, develop and support ideas, investigate, evaluate, and integrate appropriate sources. And so that's the next point that I think we need to cover, is really explore, and this is really what English composition does, is it helps you not only to learn how to write, but helps you to explore different kinds of sources, learn what sources are appropriate for certain projects, just learn what kind of sources are just generally bad sources to stay away from. So appropriate sources, given that we live in an age where your average person, a possibly misinformed and uneducated individual could simply build a website and post information online that is not credible or accurate, it becomes necessary to train students as to what kinds of sources are fitting for certain academic situations. So, for example, a good academic source, which is an online referencing system that provides full-text databases from leading information providers, EBSCOhost, something that I used quite a bit in college. I'm sorry if I can spell EBSCOhost. Many libraries actually have this, and from it you can get very scholarly articles, full-length, full-text articles through your library, and very useful because they're primary sources, meaning directly from the individual who is studying whatever point you're trying to prove. They're not like necessarily secondary sources where somebody is hearsay about some research that was done, so it's not biased necessarily, but you're kind of one step removed from the actual source with those secondary sources. But these are actually like the primary people that you actually want to get the information from, or the primary institutions. So those are very helpful. With that said, I want to move on to our next topic. This last topic is just a few steps for success in English composition in general. Just a few pointers that you can use to be successful in English composition. I would say it's definitely important that you want to understand yourself as a learner to succeed in college, or any situation that you're trying to develop new concepts or skills. It's very helpful to know what helps your gears turn in your brain, what helps make you tick. Different people learn in different ways, so it's a good idea to find out what your learning style is, what conditions actually support your learning, what environment, what practices enable you to process new information and to retain it most efficiently. So questions to consider in order to really have success in English composition are: 1, what is your learning style? Which way do you prefer to take in information? Is it seeing? Is it through hearing? Is it through actually doing it? What time of day? Secondly, what time of day helps you to really process information the best? And what time of day is your energy at its peak? Third, maybe examine your workspace environment. Sometimes some people get really picky about if their workspace is very cluttered. It really inhibits them from really taking in information seamlessly, like very easily. So sometimes people really like to have a very clean workspace because that really just gets rid of all the distractions and helps them process information more efficiently. So that's something that you may want to consider. Fourthly, along the same lines as workspace environment, study environment is very important. Questions like how much background noise is tolerable, sort of distinguishing a library from a dining area, what is more comfortable, free from distraction. Some people can study in a dining area with all the chatter in the background. Some people just simply can't. Some people can study in their bedroom. Some people just can't because they're too tempted to get on the computer or talk on the phone or whatever. So examining workspace environment is very important. Fifthly, seeking partners, study partners. It's very, be very careful about study partners or study groups. They can be very beneficial, very helpful, very effective if used appropriately, very valuable. Yet at the same time, an unproductive study group, and I put that in quotes, study group, for example, a social occasion, could be detrimental to your understanding of the material, and is also a very big waste of time. So it's important that you distinguish between social occasions and study time, because you don't want to count a social occasion as study time. So, sixth point rather, it's inevitable that certain times during the semester you will get stressed out, but be diligent to find outlets which will enable downtime for you to kind of release, just kind of get all the excess stress off your back. So such things as exercise, social occasions, when properly delimited, hobbies, it's good to invest time in those because they have their place. Just be careful not to confuse such outings with study time. So, if I were to just recap on that, I would definitely say learn your learning style. That's very important. When I say learning style, I reference, are you a visual learner? Are you somebody who needs to hear it? Are you somebody who needs to do it? That's very important. Some people are neither. Neither one of those, or neither one of those options applies really. Maybe they're the kind of person that just they have a particular kind of learning style where they just, and some people just have to actually get up and do something while they're studying, referred to as a kinesthetic learning style. Somebody who just likes to pace back and forth. Some people really benefit from that because they just have to have this locomotive aspect to studying. And I actually used to be somebody like that. I couldn't just sit still and study, or else I would get bored, but my body had to be doing something. So that kind of person maybe might want to have a highlighter in there, just highlight stuff, have their hand constantly moving, or just somebody who's constantly writing the notes over again, or something that just kind of keeps the motion going to keep them alert. Of course, if you're an auditory learner, you might want to ask your professor for permission to record the lecture or get an audio clip of the lecture and just be able to play it back and listen to it again. If you're a visual learner, you probably want to be somebody who, I doubt you'll want to carry a camera around with you, or ask your professor to record it visually, but you may just want to draw pictures in your notes. Maybe different kind of flow diagrams or different kind of charts to help you visualize the material better. So there's a lot of ways that you can use to be successful in English Composition 101, and really these principles apply to learning a lot of things, but as we've seen, learning the English language, English composition, getting a good command of it is very important because it's a foundational course in college. It's preparatory for pretty much every major that you're going to take. You're going to need to pass that class, and it's very important, as we've seen in the workplace. There's applications everywhere in the workplace. It's really the medium through which all other ideas flow, and so with that, I encourage you to definitely apply these principles. If you have any questions about trying to have success in the language, or just the language in general, feel free to ask me, and I'll be happy to address those. Alright, thank you for tuning in, and until next time, this is Bruce Irish, signing off. Thank you. Bye.